Good morning. This is week 2 for St. Croix Church, our new name, and it's actually week 2 of Social Isolation Church. And once again, I thought I would simply follow along from last week, studying the book of James. Last week we looked at the first 8 verses in James chapter 1, and today I thought I'd talk about James 1, 9 to 18. And I find this little New Testament letter is strangely relevant for people like us who are experiencing something so out of the ordinary, a time of disruption. It's like our whole lives have been disrupted by the coronavirus pandemic. And some people, of course, much worse than others, because we're in an area right now where there aren't too many sick people. So we don't know whether that's how things will continue because we're in a fairly isolated and rural area, or whether it's just a matter of time. But people around the world are experiencing much worse times if they've been touched by the virus. So we're concerned, and we also want to look to ancient texts like the New Testament for wisdom during time like this. I think a great way to go forward would be to stop the video in a moment and to go find a Bible. You can do that online at BibleGateway.com, or you just find a Bible that you have at the house and just read this passage, James 1, 9 to 18. I'd read it and then I'd start writing down ideas. What do you see that's there that seems important to you? What ideas seem important? And then you can come back and contrast them with the ideas that I'll give. I found too many ideas in this passage, just way too many to speak about, really. I probably should have taken a passage that was only 2 or 3 verses. But anyway, I'll read it to you in NRSV, so you can listen to me as well, I guess. But I think the great idea would be to go find your own Bible and work through it, because you'll get more out of it that way if you're able to do that. Okay, so a good place to stop the video is here. And then you can come back and hear me read it one more time. It's not bad to have a review. So I'm reading it from the New Revised Standard Version. Let the believer who is lowly boast in being raised up, and the rich in being brought low, because the rich will disappear like a flower in the field. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the field. Its flower falls and its beauty perishes. It's the same way with the rich. In the midst of a busy life, they will wither away. Blessed is anyone who endures temptation. Such a one has stood the test and will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. No one, when tempted, should say, I'm being tempted by God, for God can't be tempted by evil, and he himself tempts no one. But one is tempted by one's own desire, being lured and enticed by it. Then, when that desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and that sin, when it's fully grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my beloved. Every generous act of giving, with every perfect gift, is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there's no variation or shadow due to change. In fulfillment of his own purpose, he gave us birth by the word of truth, so that we would become a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Way too many ideas in this passage for me. But anyway, I'll just try to go over them, and let's see. Here's the first one. We have to remember last week's passage. It sets the stage, gives the context. We learned last week that the writer was using the language of exile. He's writing to people who are facing difficult times, adversity, and it was almost poignant, writing to people who are facing a great trial. And he said, "Count it joy when you do go through trials, because you can grow in character, and also you can ask God for help, and you can learn how to do that. You can become richer." So last week we spoke about those ideas. So that's the context for this. And this passage too begins with a recognition that there's a time of disruption going on. And there's kind of a contrast between the rich and the poor. Let the poor boast or rejoice or glory in this time. Let the rich be happy that they're being brought low. What a crazy, crazy situation. Like, how do we wrap our heads around this? Well, I think the poor being recognized as having something to boast about is the sense that they are being included in community, that somebody cares, that somebody's concerned. The New Testament church is trying to establish a community where rich and poor are equal, where they share in life together. And this is like unheard of in a society that's heavily classed. It's heavily classed in the Greco-Roman world. It's heavily classed in the Jewish world. And Jesus has this vision to create a community where people that wouldn't be accepted are fully included and fully accepted, and the rich and the poor together. So here's a brand new situation, and history is just giving birth to something absolutely beautiful because of the work of Jesus. This new community, and the new community has people in it that are poor, and they should rejoice or boast or glory. Different translations say it different ways. But actually, the word comes from, at root meaning, the word in Greek comes from the idea of a neck. So it has something to do with the posture. It's like, hold your head up. Hold your head up. You guys that have been poor, you're being included. This is really good news. But how could it be good news for the rich who are suddenly losing all their investments, or the rich who are having some of their comforts taken away by this disruption, by this trial? And the idea here is, well, because it's showing you the difference between things that are really valuable and things that aren't. Some of the things that you've been valuing because they give comfort or status really don't go the distance. They just aren't worth it in the long run. But character is, and that's what this passage is going to remind us of. And you can grow character in a time like this. You can grow patience and perseverance. You can grow deeper in your relationship with God. And as you do these things, that's something that lasts forever. That'll give you the crown of life. And there's more than one way to say crown in ancient Greece, and one or in this time period in history. One crown was the crown of royalty, but another crown was the crown of an Olympic athlete, and that's the word that's being referred to here. It's like if you do life well, you get the crown of achievement. So that's the Stephanos, it's called. So, and that's the word that's used here. Another thing about disruption, this doesn't really come from the passage, but I'm thinking about it because years ago, a business analyst, Peter Drucker, gave himself for free to people in the Vineyard denomination in the United States, to the leaders. He said, he volunteered to do this. He said, I'm very interested in new church movements, because I think they hold hope for the future. And the Vineyard was one of these. And he said, I think groups like this can be more flexible and can be more adaptable going into the future. So he said, I'd like to spend time with your leaders. And I think at that time, if I'm correct, he normally charged about $50,000 a day to be with corporations, but he was willing to do this as a pro bono act. And so I had a friend who was in the group that was with him, and a dear friend, and I said to him later, what was it all about? And he said, the main takeaway was blow it up every 5 years. If life doesn't disrupt what you're doing, you should do it yourself. So you want to keep that lean edge of creativity. You want to have a whole bunch of people working together with a sense of what can we do next, and it's so easy to default into into an institutional frame of mind. It's so easy to default into this is the way we've always done it. And so Drucker said disruption can be a very positive thing. So I just wanted to remember that. Last week I spoke about Marcus Borg and the idea that some ideas in the New Testament would push you toward a purity society. If your idea of how to imitate God was be holy as I'm holy, gradually you can create a society that has a new sense of class in it. These are the people that are pure. Jesus seems to be fighting that in Luke 6 when he says, be compassionate as your heavenly Father is compassionate. And so it seems as though what he's trying to build is a compassion society, an inclusive an inclusive society, the place where the people that don't fit in are welcome. And Jesus doesn't want the society based on oh, these people get it right and these ones don't. Instead he wants it based on the goodness of God, who loves everyone. And this passage that we're reading today is very much the same way. But with just a tweak. Conventional wisdom all around the world seems to default to the idea that bad things come if you do bad things. You deserve them. And Jesus seems consistently to be fighting this. He's bringing a subversive wisdom, Bork says. And this subversive wisdom is fighting against the conventional wisdom. In one of the gospel stories, there's somebody that's blind, and people say to Jesus, who sinned? Was it this person or his parents? And Jesus just pushes that idea away and says, no, it's to show the glory of God. And the idea is, for Jesus, is he's trying to disarm or trying to tear apart this idea that God is a bad God or a negative force, a punisher, that God is really, he's trying to take away the idea that God is like the worst part of us. And yet that idea persists all the time, and it consistently persists in conventional religion, in Christianity too. And so there are voices in the Bible that would say that that's the way to go. But Jesus seems to be fighting these voices, trying to say it's not like this. In the Old Testament, the book of Job is pretty much doing the same thing. Everybody wants to say that Job is having a terrible time because he deserves it. And he knows it isn't true, and he keeps fighting until he finally has a real encounter with God, and his way of thinking is established. So it's this subversive wisdom is trying to show us that God isn't the one you think. God's not the one who's bringing these bad things on us. God is actually the Father of lights who generously gives good gifts. God is the one who consistently loves us, cares for us, is trying to care for everyone. And yeah, I think that's a very important part of this passage. This writer is trying to say, don't blame God for this stuff that's going on. Bad things do happen, but God is the one who will help us in the midst of it. Maybe just a quick word about gender and God, because it calls God here the Father of lights, and I think that's totally appropriate. But I think that it's important to recognize that at this point in Israel's history, people had a very clear sense that there was a feminine aspect to God too. The word Shekinah that was used for the presence of God in Judaism is a feminine word. And the word that was used for the voice of God not in the scriptures, but in Judaism at the time, is bat kol, the voice of the daughter. So the idea is that when God speaks or when God is present, there's a feminine side to that. So I think that if you balance the fatherhood of God with the sense that there's a feminine and nurturing side of God, that makes a very rich and whole picture. Sometimes in history we've only focused on the one, and I think that's left us flying with one wing. So it would be richer if we had a sense of God as all gender, as complete, as whole, and as male and female, as it says in Genesis. Now, so I think that's just about it for my ideas. I have one last one. Maybe this is my best idea for today. The idea of the contrast between the rich and the poor at the beginning of the passage, and the possible word that the poor should glory in this state, set me thinking about a passage in Isaiah 40 back in the Old Testament. And it's in the Gospels. This passage is quoted. It's related to John the Baptist and prepare the way of the Lord. It says in Isaiah 40, verse 3, a voice is calling, clear the way for the Lord in the wilderness, make smooth in the desert a highway for our God. Let every valley be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low. Let the rough ground become a plain, the rugged terrain a broad valley. Then the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all flesh will see it together. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. And a voice says, call out. And he answered, What shall I call out? All flesh is grass, all its loveliness is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades when the breath of the Lord blows upon it. Surely the people are grass, the grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. It seems like there's a couple of connections between the James passage that we read and this Isaiah passage. And for one thing, it's the valleys are being lifted up and the mountains are being brought low. It's like the poor are being exalted, included in community for the first time, and the rich are being brought low in this difficult situation that life has brought. And then there's the reference to the grass and the flowers fading, which was in the James passage too. And what it says is that if a highway for the Lord will be made, if the valleys are lifted up and the mountains are brought low, I guess I've always thought, because of the connection with John the Baptist and prepare the way of the Lord, that the glory of the Lord that's to be revealed, if you could ever see this happen in life, where the low gets lifted and the high gets brought down, I've always thought that the glory that would be revealed was Jesus himself. And I guess that's true. I mean, I think that's what the Gospels are saying. But maybe it's even more than that in a way. Maybe it's what Jesus was trying to accomplish, which would be a community that was full of inclusion and love and people with every kind of ability and disability, and the people that everybody wanted and nobody wanted, and the people that just a rich and poor community coming together and learning how to love each other, and a place where the Spirit of God was so active, where healings could take place, where little whispers of truth could come, where creativity was strong. Anyway, I'm getting carried away. So I think wouldn't that be a beautiful thing if the low got brought up and the high got brought down, and God's Spirit was alive in the midst of it. Final word from me is that Shannon in our prayer group had the idea today that maybe Psalm 37, particularly in the Message, would be good for people to read this week. And we're going to post some music too. So take care. Bye now.